As much as when I got started in sports science and training, I wanted to be like the guy that was standing next to Ivan Drago holding the clipboard and pinning him full of tests. I don't think that we are engineers. I think a better analogy is that we are gardeners and we are trying to provide the best environment, which is multifactorial, for our plants to grow. Coach, back with another idea for you here. You remember watching Rocky 4 and like when Ivan's training with the Soviet scientists? He's like running on the treadmill and there's like a guy there with a clipboard and they're obviously pinning him with tests and all this stuff. That's what I imagine when you first get into elite levels of training athletes, right? We see ourselves as these architects, these engineers of like masterful performance. Where brick by brick you lay down the outcome that you want, the growth of the athlete, the performance capability of the athlete, right? I think it's not unreasonable that we view ourselves that way, right? We engineer these programs that build our athletes in a certain way, right? Just like a house, okay? Brick by brick, presto changeo, you got a house at the end, as long as you started off with a well laid out plan. To take this illustration one step further, think about like what human beings as a species have been able to overcome by pure force of will in terms of the constraints of nature, right? What we've been able to build despite how nature and the world gets in, these marvelous engineering masterpieces, right, that bend nature to our will, to in the sake of convenience or progress or whatever we want as a species. But is that linear force of will kind of thinking actually a reasonable way to like view the way that what we do as strength coaches, what we build in athletes, what we're able to produce, our outcomes? I think a better way to view it is actually something I stole from the book. I have it here. Strength Conditioning for Sports Performance. There's a chapter in there by Ian Jeffries. It's not often that you find a really cool idea in a textbook, but he has a chapter in there that I stole this idea from, that we're really more like gardeners than we are engineers. And I'm going to dive into like what the implications of that thinking concept actually are. All right, so first a little bit of example, okay? As you know, because you've been to my house, we recently planted a bunch of plants in our front garden bed thing, okay? So we went out and we bought all these plants. As you know as well, being a plant guy yourself, plants are expensive. Not being a plant guy, I figure once you buy them, you probably want to put them in the ground sooner rather than later. Now, this was May, which is pretty close to the summertime. I thought it was a good time to plant plants. It is a good time to plant plants. So we get these plants, and by the time we have time to actually plant them, it's about a week's gone by, so I'm itching to get them in the ground. And then a cold front hits, and we have like multiple nights in a row of 20 degrees, okay? So at this point, I'm like bringing the plants inside at night, right? And then during the day, when it's warm, I'm putting them back outside to get sunlight. I'm watering them, doing all that stuff, and then putting them all back inside, taking up a bunch of space in our kitchen and stuff to be able to protect them, right, from the environment. And that type of iterative, local, tending to the needs of the exact plant, I think is actually much more representative of what we do in strength conditioning, the realities of athletic performance, than it is like erecting a skyscraper, right, or something like that. And coach, this brings me to basically my first implication of this idea. And it's a recognition that we don't do any of the growth. The athletes are 100% responsible for the growth. And that might seem like, okay, sure. But it is very different than being like an engineer, right? Like you start off with a blueprint for a house, and like I said before, brick by brick, you get the outcome that you want. You build what you want, okay? It's directly proportional to the amount of time and resources you put in, and that's what you get. But the plants are absolutely responsible for their own growth. Okay. They are the ones that are causing their growth, not us. Okay. Can we influence it? Certainly, can we influence it? Will our influence wax and wane throughout different periods of time? Absolutely, it will. Are there times that as much as we try and influence it, nothing we will do seems to help? Most certainly. Are there times that we pull back and we don't think our influence is quite as good and they absolutely flourish? Absolutely. That's much more like the realities of what an athlete is going to do. They are responsible for their own growth. What are we responsible for? We can only control ourselves, right? And our immediate environment around us. So that's just like we do with plants, that's what we control. We try to provide an environment in which the plants can do the growing themselves. We try and influence the environment more than we're trying to influence them themselves, what they're exposed to, right? All those things to help provide the nutrients and things that they need to be able to make adaptation, to be able to grow, to be able to get bigger, stronger, faster, whatever it is. I mean, think specifically, right? Like there are a number of things in the environment that are going to affect the plants, right? What's the predominant weather? Even if it's not the predominant weather, what is the weather supposed to be expected when you first plant them? What kind of soil drainage do you have, right? How much sun? Is it full sun? Is it partial sun? Like all of these things we're having to consider to be able to provide the environment at which that they can best grow. Which brings me to my next point, which is a lot of things, if not most things in athletic performance training, are outside of our control, right? It's like super multifactorial, all these things that are affecting the athlete. It's not just your program. There's hundreds of things. There's potentially thousands of things that are impacting their ability to adapt, right? A lot of these things are outside of our control. Just like for our plants, can we have a guess at what the weather is going to be for that time of the year? Certainly. Are we ever going to guess it 100%? Absolutely not. So we can consider these things and be prepared for them. But at the end of the day, we're going to be reactionary to what's going on and have to meet the plant or the athlete at where they're at with what their current needs are. Short of picking up your house and moving it, there's not a ton that you can do to the soil conditions, right? If you have super sandy, hard, maybe it's super sandy or it's super hard packed soil or whatever it is, that's not going to be conducive to a wide variety of plants being able to thrive there. Now, you can try and influence it as much as you can, but you're never going to overcome it completely. So the first thing that you have to realize with this approach of the gardener strength coach is accept that you can't control most things. But what you absolutely can control is yourself and the immediate environment in which you make, which is largely usually the culture of the weight room, right? Those are the things that you can control. And then there's also like the cultural side of that, right? And while I agree with a lot of coaches that are like, hey, if I have to bring the energy for you, you shouldn't be here. That's totally well and good. And to a large extent, I agree with that. And I actually don't think you see that often, or at least not the majority of the time with elite athletes. But you can definitely play a large role in the culture of your weight room, right? And if your weight room culture is the equivalent of the Sahara Desert, don't expect a wide variety of plants to be able to flourish there, right? So accept that you can't control a lot of stuff. Plan for the fact that there are a lot of things outside of your control. Try to influence what you can, which is most going to be radiating out from you. The further it radiates out from you, the less and less influence that you're going to be able to have. Control yourself, what you do, your immediate environment, and accept that there's going to be a lot of things that you can't control and that the athlete is largely responsible for their own growth at the end of the day, as long as you can provide it a good environment. No matter how hard you may try, if you want to get a certain plant, right, that only grows in the tropics to live in central Pennsylvania, short of building in a greenhouse and all these types of things, right? Like I'm being realistic here. No matter how hard you try, you're not going to be able to make it to work, right? And I think I've been guilty of that in strength conditioning, where you look for the perfect system, or a coach has this great program that they run, right? And you're trying to build this perfect system or program or copy somebody else's and use it with your athletes, because there has to be one completely efficacious program for your athletes that absolutely is the truth to all things. I've been very guilty of that as like a younger strength coach, right? Trying as hard as I can to find that program, which often just leads to program hopping, admittedly. But like, what worked for that coach or with that system or whatever it is, to a large degree, has almost very little, if not no, implications for how well it's going to work in your specific environment. Because the context, your environment, is king, and it's what everything else needs to be filtered through. Think, for example, about Westside, right? Like, everybody wants to take Conjugate, Westside Conjugate, and supplant it into their program, but it's like the Westside program is largely fractal in the fact that it's a conglomeration of the club itself, right? They're big, they're aggressive, they're metal, right? That's how their program is, and that's how their club is. So take it out of that environment, and it's not going to work the same way. Are there things that we can get from other people's programs? 100%. I steal things from other people's programs all the time. What you will end up usually seeing is the fact that it's really principles of their program that are what's causing things to work, not the program itself and the specific details. But that's my point, is that the context largely matters. So you can't just pick up things that work somewhere else and put it in your own environment, because it is your environment that's determining whether or not the growth of your athletes actually happens. Coach, to kind of follow up on that point, I also think it brings up the point of individualization, right? Like, I've been guilty of spending all this time researching and designing a program, this is especially true with like team sports, where you have to design one program, right? There's multiple iterations of that program, but for a bunch of athletes at a time. And, you consider where you're at in the year and what your athletes need. And maybe you have different tiers depending on their training history and those types of things. You spend all this time researching, blah, blah, blah. You build these programs, and inevitably you go to execute it. And it's like, the first day somebody comes up to you and they're like, my wrist hurts, I can't do this, or I can't do that. And they seem like minor things to you. And that's kind of why I think as strength coaches, we get frustrated, right? And I brought this up in the Keep Your Identity Small video, but because you put all this time, your identity is invested in this program, and then someone's like, well, I can't do it. And when I was a young strength coach, that really frustrated me, because I'm like, you can do it, just do it. This is the right program, right? It's the right program. But I think this Gardner approach helps you realize that your ability to impact is largely at the local level. It's largely at the level of the individual plant. It's largely at the level of the individual athlete. You have to meet them where they are, as difficult as that is. And to be honest, to be successful in doing that, we have to find time-efficient ways to do that. And I think, importantly, we have to find ways to meet them at the local level of each individual athlete, while making sure to maintain the principles of the program that absolutely matter for giving them that environment to grow, right? If we just throw things completely out, then it's not going to have any benefit, right? If I throw out the program altogether because an athlete just complains, well, then I'd never train anybody, because they're all going to complain at some point in time. So it's a way we have to, just like with our plants, right? Because if I go to plant a bunch of different varieties of plants, maybe they all do great in my climate, but they're all different, right? And some are going to need different amounts of sun. Some are going to need different types of soil, right? Some are going to need more space from plants next to them than others. I need to consider each of that on the individual level, and it's what I need to do with the athlete, but the predominant principles of the environment shouldn't change. That way that I'm meeting them where they're at, but then they're also able to grow and flourish. Coach, the last way I think is potentially one of the most interesting ways to look at this. I'm not going to go into all the details about how I think this relates to a multitude of different things, but I think that it does relate well to the actual training aspect of what we're going to do. And I've discussed with you kind of the duality of training in the past. And this is going to be basically another iteration of that when we view ourselves as these gardeners. So I planted those plants, right? And in my research on how to be a gardener, I found that you water shallow yet frequently in the beginning. And then as time progresses and your plants become more well established, you water deeper and less frequently. Now, again, even that sentence itself, I could go off tangents on like 100 things about that, how that relates to training. But the point is that there is this dualistic nature, just like with plants, of the way we're going to train them, right? Now, training is fractal in nature, so this could represent what you do throughout the course of a season, or also represent how you might train an athlete over the course of their career, okay? But the principle remains the same. And the principle is this. So you water shallowly but frequently in the beginning because you want to get them to expand their roots out. They want to build a base with their root system, okay? Just like we do in training, right? We build the beginning, we build a base, okay? And then as you transition to as you transition to watering more deeply and less frequently, that water gets trapped deeper and deeper below the surface. So after they've grown out, you're now encouraging them to go find that water that's deeper in the surface so their roots begin to go down, okay? And that's much more like refinement of what we're doing, right? We build in the beginning and then we sharpen what we've built towards the exact sport or adaptations or whatever it is that we're trying to develop. It's just the same should be true of training. And this is what I think is super, super interesting of this idea too, is a lot of plants, they might all have this. Again, I'm not actually a gardener, if you can't tell. Is a lot of plants have something called a taproot. So the taproot is like the middle stem and it goes directly down. The taproot never grows out. It only ever grows straight down, right? So even in the beginning when all these other roots are growing out to build this base of support so that it can support more growth in the future, just like what we're doing in training, that taproot continues to just go straight down. And I think it shows the yin and yang of training, that it's like they both live within each other. Without the taproot, right, it's like, I'm like speaking like plants can think at this level. They can't, but without the taproot, it's like, what are we building to go? In what direction are we building this base to later go? They both live and are a part of each other and are born of each other, right? Without the base, the taproot can't do anything. It can't support the plant without the base of the roots, but without the taproot always having that very specific nature of what our training should be, without that little bit of guidance in there, okay, then this base is also useless as well because we can't refine it towards anything that's actually useful in our sport. So anyway, coach, in summary, as much as when I got started in sports science and training, I wanted to be like the guy that was standing next to Ivan Drago holding the clipboard and pinning him full of tests, I don't think that we are engineers. I think a better analogy is that we are gardeners. And we are trying to provide the best environment, which is multifactorial, for our plants to grow. Obviously, our plants being our athletes. But at the end of the day, the athletes are responsible for their growth. There are a lot of things that are outside of our control. The one thing we can absolutely control almost all the time is ourselves. The way that we go about our business, how much discipline and effort we put into it, right? All of those things, how conscientious we are, what our interaction with the the athletes are on a daily basis, and that this has massive implications, right? Not only from how important context is to the importance to individualization for each athlete or each plant or however you want to put it, and also the interesting nature of the way you provide this environment to allow for the most sufficient long-term growth is largely to build base and then to go deeper, right? And then to specialize more, just like we see in training. Coach, that's all I got for you. Let me know what you think.